Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into something that I think a lot of you are really curious about, becoming a nuclear technician. We've got a ton of great info from RoleCatcher to help us break it all down.
Yeah, it's a career path that people think they understand, but there's often a lot more to it than meets the eye. I'm excited to dig into these resources with you.
Me too. We've got excerpts from their career guide for nuclear technicians, a peek into their interview prep materials, and even a look at how their job search platform works.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. So where should we start? I guess the first thing is to get a grasp on what a nuclear technician actually does day to day. What kind of work are we talking about here?
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me from the RoleCatcher guide is that they emphasize labs as a key work environment. It's not all just power plants like a lot of folks might assume.
Oh, interesting. So less about cooling towers and more about research facilities. That opens up a whole other side to this, doesn't it?
Exactly. It really broadens the scope of what a nuclear technician might do. They could be working on groundbreaking stuff in a cutting-edge lab.
That's pretty cool. And speaking of assumptions, the guide doesn't shy away from the serious side of the work either. They use some pretty strong language right off the bat. Stuff like hazardous environments, strict safety protocols, even the need for protective gear.
Yeah, they definitely don't sugarcoat it, which I appreciate. Safety is paramount in this field, so it's good to see that emphasized right from the start.
For sure. If I were considering this career path, I'd want to know that they take safety seriously. Yeah, it shows a level of respect for the work.
Precisely. And it's not just about individual safety either. They talk about how nuclear technicians often work closely with physicists and engineers. So you're part of a team, collectively responsible for protecting not just yourselves, but the environment as well.
Okay, so it's a team effort, potentially with some really high stakes.
Yeah.
Sounds intense. But where does one even begin on this career path?
Well, thankfully, RoleCatcher lays out a clear progression, outlining the steps from entry level all the way to becoming a seasoned pro. They break it down into four main stages: entry level, junior, mid level, and senior nuclear technician.
And they don't just list them out, they give you the inside scoop on what to actually expect at each level. Like they even have example profiles that show typical tasks and the skills you'd need to move up. That's really helpful, isn't it?
Absolutely. It gives you concrete goals to work toward and a clear understanding of where you stand in your career. I mean, at the junior level, for example, you might be assisting senior technicians with stuff like routine maintenance or calibrating instruments. But as you move into that mid-level role, you'd be taking on more responsibility, maybe even supervising less experienced techs or troubleshooting those really complex equipment malfunctions.
Right, so you're not just stuck doing the same thing forever. There's definitely room to grow and take on new challenges as you gain experience. Which, speaking of, let's talk about those tools that RoleCatcher offers. They seem to have really invested in creating a whole platform to help people navigate this specific career path.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about their AI-powered resume tailoring proof. What do you make of that?
It's really smart, honestly. Like, say you're applying for a nuclear technician role, right?
Hmm.
And the focus is on radiation safety. Their AI can actually scan the job description, see what skills they're really looking for, and then tweak your resume so those things really jump out at the hiring manager.
Wow, so it's like having a personalized resume writer in your back pocket.
Exactly. And not just any writer, one who knows the ins and outs of the nuclear industry. I mean, it even suggests those industry-specific keywords that you might not think to include.
That's amazing. Especially when you're probably sending out a bunch of applications. It would be a huge time saver to not have to tweak every little thing manually.
Right. It takes out some of the guesswork, which is a relief when you're already feeling stressed about the job search. And honestly, it's not just about getting past those resume scanning algorithms. It's about presenting yourself in the best possible light to the actual humans who are going to be making the hiring decisions.
Totally. So it's like a secret weapon. And speaking of weapons, let's talk about those interview practice tools. Those sound pretty powerful too.
Oh, they're intense. Imagine having a database of over 120,000 interview questions. And not just random ones. These are specifically designed for different career paths, including, of course, nuclear technician.
Okay, so you could practice answering technical questions about radiation safety, equipment operation, the
Yeah.
works.
Even those scenario-based questions that really put you on the spot and test how you'd handle a high-pressure situation.
It's like a dress rehearsal for the real deal. I bet that would be so helpful, not just to brush up on the technical stuff, but also just to calm your nerves.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really cool. It's not just about spitting out answers. Rollcatcher's platform actually gives you AI-powered feedback on your responses.
Whoa, for real. What kind of feedback are we talking about?
Well, it can analyze things like your tone of voice, how clearly you're explaining things. It might even suggest ways to structure your answers for maximum impact.
It's like having a personal interview coach right there in your pocket. That's incredible. You mentioned earlier that RoleCatcher emphasizes the teamwork aspect of this work. Do their resources talk about the soft skills that are important for success in this field, like communication or teamwork, those kinds of things?
Oh, absolutely. They actually have a whole section in their career guide specifically about essential soft skills for nuclear
Oh,
technicians.
cool. Like
Well,
what kind of stuff do they highlight?
well, they talk about things like, clear communication, being a good listener, being able to solve problems as a team, even conflict resolution, which, let's face it, comes up in any workplace.
True that. It's a good reminder that even in a highly technical field like this, those people skills are super important. You're not just working with machines, you're working with people.
Right. And often under a lot of pressure. So yeah, being able to communicate effectively and keep a cool head is essential. I mean, imagine a situation where there's like a potential safety hazard. Clear communication could literally make all the difference.
No kidding. That's a really good point. So Rollcatcher is painting a pretty positive picture here, highlighting all the great resources and career paths and such. But let's be real for a sec.
Hmm.
What about the downsides?
Hmm.
Are there any challenges or drawbacks to working as a nuclear technician that we should talk about?
It's a fair question, and to their credit, Rollcatcher doesn't shy away from addressing the, well, less glamorous aspects of this job. They're upfront about the fact that there is potential exposure to radiation and other hazardous materials. Even with all the safety protocols in place, it's just a reality of working in this field.
Right. That's important to acknowledge. And it's not just the hazards themselves. It's the awareness and responsibility that come with it. You constantly have to be thinking about safety, right? Both yours and everyone else's.
Exactly. They mention that the work can also be pretty physically demanding at times. You might be on your feet for hours, working in cramped spaces, could even involve some heavy lifting.
Okay, so it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. But for the right person, someone who's really drawn to challenging work and knows they can handle that level of responsibility, it could be an amazing fit.
Right. And that's why it's so important to explore every aspect of this career path before taking the plunge.
Totally agree. So we've talked about the day-to-day work, the safety stuff, the collaborative nature of the job. But what about the bigger picture? Where does a career as a nuclear technician ultimately lead? What's the trajectory look like?
That's where things get really interesting. Rollcatcher paints a picture of a field with a ton of growth potential and diverse opportunities to move up the ladder. It's not just about hands-on technical work forever. You could eventually go into management or specialize in a specific area that interests you.
Like you could be supervising a team of technicians, overseeing big projects, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And because the field's always advancing, there's a big emphasis on continuous learning. They actually recommend getting additional certifications throughout your career to stay ahead of the curve.
Oh, that makes sense. What kind of certifications are we talking about?
Well, they mentioned the Certified Nuclear Technician credential. That one seems pretty standard. They also talk about the Radiation Safety Officer certification, which is obviously huge if you're responsible for overseeing all the safety protocols.
Right. That sounds like a really critical role.
For sure. And then, of course, if you're interested in health physics, there's the Certified Health Physicist credential.
So many options. It seems like these certifications are not just about checking boxes. They can actually open doors to new opportunities and higher level roles.
Absolutely. And speaking of opportunities, let's talk about the job market itself. What's the outlook like for aspiring nuclear technicians? Are there jobs out there? That's another area where RoleCatcher delivers some good news. They cite the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which projects a 5% growth rate for nuclear technician jobs over the next 10 years.
5%? That's actually pretty significant. What's driving that demand?
Well, for one thing, existing nuclear power plants aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They need constant maintenance, upgrades, all that. So there's a steady need for skilled technicians to keep things running smoothly and safely.
Makes sense. Those are complex facilities that require specialized expertise, right?
Exactly. And the other factor is the ongoing need for skilled professionals in nuclear labs and research facilities. Plus, emerging sectors like nuclear medicine rely heavily on skilled technicians. It's a field with a lot of different applications, way beyond just power generation.
So it sounds like a career with a lot of stability, which is definitely appealing these days. But what about the earning potential? What can someone realistically expect to make as a nuclear technician?
But keep in mind, it can vary depending on experience, location, all that. But according to RoleCatcher, an entry-level technician can expect to earn a median salary of around $60,000 per year.
That's not bad at all, especially for a career that doesn't necessarily require a 4-year degree right out of the gate.
Right, and as you gain experience and move into those mid-level positions, that median salary jumps up to about $85,000 per year.
Okay, so there's definitely room for growth on the salary front, too.
For sure. And those who reach that senior technician level, they can earn well over $100,000 annually.
Wow, that's a pretty comfortable living.
Mm.
Okay, so we're talking about a career path with good job security, solid earning potential, and the chance to really make a difference in the world. What's not to like?
Right. And RoleCatcher does a great job of emphasizing that this is more than just a paycheck. It's about contributing to a field that has a real impact on our lives, whether it's keeping the lights on or advancing medical treatments.
It's about being a part of something bigger than yourself. Okay, before we move on, I'm curious. RoleCatcher clearly has a ton of great resources, but how do they actually suggest aspiring nuclear technicians go about connecting with potential employers? How do you actually land that dream job?
Well, they dedicate a whole section of their platform to job search strategies and networking, all tailored to the nuclear industry.
Let's talk about that. Networking that can be kind of intimidating. What's their take on it?
They really emphasize that networking can make or break your job search in this field. It's about building those personal connections, getting your foot in the door.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, how do they suggest going about that?
Well, they have a ton of advice on how to build a professional network within the nuclear industry. Stuff like going to industry conferences, joining professional organizations like the American Nuclear Society, for example, and even using online platforms like LinkedIn to connect with people in the field.
So it's all about putting yourself out there and making those connections.
Yeah.
Do they give any specific tips on how to actually do that effectively?
Oh, yeah, tons. They talk about how to craft a good elevator pitch, how to make the most of networking events, even how to follow up with people afterwards, which a lot of people forget to do.
Those are super practical tips.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just about networking, of course. They also talk about more traditional job search stuff. Like, they really encourage people to use those online job boards that are specifically for the nuclear industry.
Oh, yeah, those are super helpful.
And they also say, don't be afraid to reach out directly to nuclear power plants, research labs, those kinds of places. Sometimes a direct approach can be really effective.
Especially if you've done your research and can speak to the company's specific needs and goals, it shows you're really interested.
Totally. And you know what else they recommend? Informational interviews.
Oh, those are great.
Right. Reach out to people who are already working as nuclear technicians and pick their brains. It's a fantastic way to learn more about different career paths, and you never know, that informational interview could turn into a job offer down the road.
You're right. Okay, so much great advice from RoleCatcher. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the day-to-day responsibilities of a nuclear technician to the career progression, job outlook, and even salary expectations. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, mindset.
Ah, yes, the importance of having the right mindset.
Exactly. What kind of person thrives in this kind of role? What are the personality traits that lend themselves to success as a nuclear technician?
Well, it's interesting. RoleCatcher doesn't have like a dedicated section on personality types or anything, but they kind of touch on it throughout all the different resources they provide. When you think about the work itself, like the precision required, the whole safety aspect, the fact that you might be dealing with some pretty high pressure situations, certain traits come to mind.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So paint me a picture here. What kind of person are we picturing?
Okay, so imagine you're working in a nuclear facility, right? Maybe you're calibrating some really sensitive equipment or even handling radioactive materials. There's no room for error. Someone who's going to thrive in that environment is probably very detail-oriented, process-driven, methodical in their approach. Someone who double checks their work, follows procedures to a T, doesn't cut corners.
It's that whole safety first mentality.
Right. Exactly. And it
Yeah.
goes beyond just protecting yourself. You're protecting your team, the public, the environment. So it takes a certain kind of person to handle that level of responsibility, someone who understands the potential consequences, even with those routine tasks. It's almost like they have this internal alarm system that's always on, scanning for potential issues, prioritizing safety above all else.
I love that. An internal alarm system. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But it's not just about being cautious, right? You also have to be adaptable. Think on your feet,
Yeah.
especially when those unexpected situations pop up.
You got it. RoleCatcher talks about this a lot, like how you might have to troubleshoot really complex equipment, respond to alarms, work as a team to address a potential hazard. Those situations require you to stay calm under pressure and make good judgment calls fast.
So we're not just talking about rule followers here. We're talking about quick thinkers, problem solvers. It's a pretty unique combination. And what about that teamwork aspect we keep coming back to? How does that factor into the personality of a successful nuclear technician?
That's huge. I mean, even though a lot of the work might seem solitary, like you're off doing your own specific tasks, you're never really alone in a nuclear facility, right? You rely on your team and they rely on you. So Rollcatcher really stresses those interpersonal skills, communication, active listening, collaboration. You got to be able to work together, especially under pressure, to make sure everyone stays safe and everything runs smoothly.
Yet again, it comes back to safety being the top priority. It's not just about having the technical chops. It's about being a good communicator, a good listener, a good teammate.
Exactly. And it builds trust, which is crucial in this kind of environment. You need to know that you can count on the people you're working with, especially when things get intense.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like we've explored just about every angle of this career path today. We've talked about the work itself, the challenges, the rewards, the skills you need, the job outlook, even the salary expectations. But before we wrap up this deep dive, is there one key takeaway, one final thought that you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think the biggest thing to remember is this. Becoming a nuclear technician, it's not just a job, it's a calling. It's for those who are drawn to precision, who are driven by a sense of responsibility, who are really committed to making a real-world impact. It's a demanding field for sure, but it also offers a unique sense of purpose and the chance to contribute to something truly important.
I love that. A calling. And you know what? I think that's a perfect note to end on. So to all our listeners out there, if you're looking for a career that's challenging, rewarding, and makes a real difference, then maybe becoming a nuclear technician is the path for you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring.